Welcome to YRU on CJRU 1280 AM.
The views expressed in this show do not necessarily represent those of the Office of the Provincial Advocate for Children and Youth.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. My name is Annika, and your name is?
My name is Theodore Syrette. You can call me Teddy.
Hello, Teddy. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm from Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. I was born in Rankin Reserve, Batchewana First Nation of the Ojibwe. So I'm a status First Nation person. I identify as two-spirit and gender fluid. And I'm an advocate and artist for queer Indigenous folks and topics. So I go around to different places with educators, students, youth, community leaders, service providers, and talk to them about what it means to be two-spirit for myself and how they can build capacity to be more inclusive for diverse people.
Well, that's a great segue to my next question, which is, what does being two-spirited mean to you?
Well, two-spirit for me is to be broken down to many different facets. So it's inclusive of gender expression, sexuality, but also tied into cultural traditions, spirituality. And for me, it's also a very political term because two-spirit identity and queer Indigenous folks have always been here on Turtle Island. They've always been around. And after colonization and European contact, that was lost. So you had something where two-spirit people who were gender diverse, in some cases had multiple partners, multiple different names, they had different teachings and different roles they played in their communities, sometimes held in high regard, sometimes had very important roles in their community. And then after European contact, that was lost. So you saw something that was well respected and then is seen as an abomination that needed to be dealt with. So a lot of those times where those two-spirited people were met with a lot of violence, a lot of them were killed and murdered, and as part of assimilation. And later on, you had reservations that were created where First Nations people were allocated to a land area where they couldn't leave, where they needed to get permission. And there would be times if there were two-spirited people who were identified or people who thought they were identified, somebody would tell what was known as the Indian agent, and the Indian agent would come along and take these people from those communities and try to get them to conform to whether their birth gender was or what a heterosexual relationship or personality or identity would look like. European contact was made, a lot of people had to give up their two-spirited people, like they were forced to give them up, and not just not just the people themselves, but also what their names were, what their rules were, and what teachings came along, and so they're hidden and lost for a long period of time, and it's very hard for people to try to figure out what that means. So the term two-spirit is a very modern term as well. It came out in 1990 during a conference of queer Indigenous and queer American Indians that came together and had a conference in Manitoba, and someone had a vision or someone had a dream about the term two-spirit. So they named it as Nish Minatuwag. So Manitou meaning spirit, Wag meaning plural, Nish meaning two, so two spirits. And how encompassing of the spiritual identity that all people are born with as a spirit, and whether they're masculine or feminine, but always believing that two-spirited people had that balance of both masculine and feminine identities or spirits within their body. After residential schools, you had 150 to 160 years of residential school where you had youth being abducted from their communities and taken from their homes, and their culture was erased. So on top of that being reinforced of the homophobia and transphobia that Europeans had brought into this country and what that culture looked like for them. So it reinforced that homophobia and transphobia behavior for Indigenous people for 150, 160 years. And residential schools were just, the last one closed in 1997. So it's not that far ago. It's less than 20 years ago. And that's a lot of damage that a lot of Indigenous people have to unpack for themselves if they don't have any kind of idea or any kind of acknowledgement of two-spirit people in their identities. And it's very hard. It's very challenging because we know know that there's a lot of Indigenous people out there who are suffering. We know that the rates for, depending on their social location, there can be high aspects of poverty, homelessness, substance abuse, concurrent disorder, violence, and suicide and suicidal ideation and mental illness. And if you look at the rates of LGBTQ people who also suffer from high rates of poverty, mental illness, suicide, suicidal ideation, substance abuse, and concurrent disorder, and if you put those two populations together of Indigenous and queer folks, then those rates are probably really high, and a lot of them isn't recorded because when it comes down to acts of suicide, gender and sexuality isn't recorded. So that information is kind of lost once that person dies. So if there's high rates of suicide and suicidal ideation in First Nations communities, my question is how many of those people are also LGBTQ identified or struggling with their sexuality or gender identity?
Wow, thank you for that. Very informative. Which pronoun do you prefer to be referred to as?
I'm open to masculine and feminine pronouns, so he, him, she, her. I'm also open to they, them, as somebody who identifies as gender fluid. I always thought I identified as male primarily, but that always never felt comfortable, but also never feeling comfortable as being female as well. So I never identified as a trans woman, right. Even though my expression sometimes can be very feminine, where some days I can wear makeup and do my hair and wear a dress and look really pretty, and then people identify me as being transgendered or a transgender woman, and I'm like, and for a long time I understand that the term two-spirit and gender fluid can fall under the trans spectrum. So it took me just this past year to basically come to terms that no, I can identify as trans if I choose to, but primarily it's two-spirit and gender fluid. So I use multiple pronouns.
When she's gone.
Which social activist movement are you a part of?
I was always a part of the queer movement, so the LGBTQ movement growing up. I knew that I was different as a young child. So at 10 years old, there was this show that came out called Saved by the Bell, and there was this blonde-haired guy named Zach Morris on the show who was the lead character, and I fell in love with them, and I didn't know why as a kid. I was just having these feelings, and I was like, this is kind of odd. And then understanding that I was gay, or the term homosexual, because around that time when I was coming out, Ontario was passing, or different provinces on Canada were passing same-sex legislation, and in 2005, where it was recognized right across Canada for in every province and territory. So at that time in the media, I was getting more familiar about what that term meant and my connection to it. Like my ears always perked up when I heard the word gay or homosexual, and I knew that was something that was resonating within myself, so I didn't know why. So at that point, I came out to friends and my sisters when I was 12. Came out to my mother when I was 15, and I started going to an LGBTQ youth group in Sault Ste. Marie at the Algoma AIDS Network back in the day, and that basically introduced me to like other identities and other queer kids within my community, because growing up in Northern Ontario in Sault Ste. Marie, I thought I was the only gay person, and it wasn't until a few months later that I met another gay First Nations kid, and I was like, holy, we're not alone. There's like other people like us that look like me who are going through very similar circumstances that I am.
Right. No, I'm just smiling because it works perfectly with my next question, which is, was your coming out more or less accepted by your community?
It all depends. I think for a lot of people, they face that risk of, depending if they come out as anything, of the potential chance of how are people going to react to me. So, and there were some times where I did lose a couple of friends where I told maybe the wrong person, where I got too comfortable, and then it got out really fast like wildfire. So in elementary school, we were very close because we all grew up together. So like it wasn't that bad, and I had a small class of like I think 15 or 16 students. Right. And but going to high school, from like in the first day of being introduced and not knowing anybody in that school, and like your entire class in elementary school that you graduated with are kind of like dispersed, and you're not always around there to help and protect each other. So it was like almost like going to high school of 700 students on the first day of not knowing that nobody knew that I was gay, but I was already out at that time. And by almost like the second and third day, I felt like the entire school knew that I was gay because I was already out. So that provided with a lot of difficulty for me. So I was faced with not only homophobia for being gay, but also racism for being Native. And because I lived on a reserve and my school was like right across the highway from my high school. So I remember walking to school all the time, like in the sunlight, and it felt really nice. It was really nice and bright, but it was always so sad to go walk back home because of like the torment or the harassment or bullying that I was faced. And going back home, thinking that it could be a safer community, it wasn't always like that, because where my community was, they're not really accepting of or aware of two-spirit identity or anything LGBTQ related. So it was hard to fit in there because a lot of those people who are very traditional and like involved in their culture, who are really enforced of gender roles, like strict binary roles, that this is the role for the women and this is the role for man, but not making space for two-spirit or queer people. So I always felt like I had to choose who I wanted to be. At a very young age, I decided to not be Indigenous after I came out to a few more people, only because I wasn't accepted in my own community for being gay. So I always felt like if people can accept me for being gay, then I want to be with those people compared to my First Nations community for a lot of people who couldn't accept me. And then that also included my mother, who took a long time for her to come to terms with who I am.
And what progress have you seen in Toronto within the LGBT community?
I think in Toronto's always been like almost kind of like a mecca for like queer folks, like anywhere in Ontario, especially from rural communities, smaller towns, or First Nations, because I think a lot of people know what Church Street is, right? So, and like we have a Church Street in Sault Ste. Marie, but it's very different compared to the Church Street here in Toronto. And I always think that like it's always been a welcoming place, but there's still a lot of discrepancies and there's still a lot of issues of discrimination within the LGBTQ community itself, and where it's not as accessible for others. So I always think about out-migration for people leaving their communities for a sense of community, especially coming to Toronto so they can be part of the queer community, and thinking, this is great, I'm here with other LGBTQ people, I can see myself on the street, and then getting right into like the bottom of the beast and just saying, oh, damn, this is a lot harder if they don't have any supports in place to help themselves. So I'm lucky that I've come to Toronto. I've been working in and out of Toronto for the past 5 years as an advocate and as a freelance artist. So I build a community for myself here. But for a lot of people who are either forced out of their homes, kicked out of their homes, or runaways, who might not have those same supports, it can be very difficult for them and very hard for them.
What does it mean to you to be an advocate for the LGBT community?
There's a lot of responsibility when it comes to it, and I don't take this work lightly, because there's a lot of people out there who say, I want to do all this work, and it's like, okay, good, but it's like you really have to work on yourself and what it means to identify for yourself. So for myself, I always thought it was like, no, I'm a gay male, and that's it, and that's the end all. Right. But starting meeting other people and having listening to their stories and listening what their needs were, what their gaps were that they're being faced, or the challenges that they faced, started to really make me ask myself those questions of what are my own challenges. I was in Toronto and somebody asked me, walking on the street, it was late at night, and I was kind of like in like flowy white outfit, and somebody asked me, this guy is like, are you a guy or a girl? And I didn't know what to do, and I just started running. Sure. But like not running from him, but I was almost felt like running away from the question, because like I was like, okay, am I a guy? Am I a girl? When was the last time I asked myself that question? How come I cannot give a straight answer right now? For like most people who are cisgender, they're like, no, I'm a girl. No, I'm a guy. Of course I am. Of course I know who I am. And for me, with that one moment, I was like, holy man, I don't know who I am. What does this mean? So I had to do a lot of self-discovery. Well, it's really hard, because like when I go do a presentation or when I go to a lecture, I always say it's like, I identify as a queer Indigenous person, and I am here to tell you my story and how the world impacts me and how I impact it. But I do not come here and speak to you and represent all queer people or all Indigenous people. I just remember myself as like a queer kid who didn't know where to go or what supports or services were in place. And for the people who, like the guidance counselors or educators or adults in my life who knew that I was gay and knew that I was struggling, who wanted to help but just didn't know how, only because the services weren't there and support, or they didn't know who to go to. So for myself doing this work, I always want to try and be like the mentor or the support that I can provide for somebody, because those supports and places weren't there for me. Right. So if I can offer that help to somebody and alleviate somebody else's like suffering or pain or give them some kind of clarity, and then that's the work that I want to be doing. So it is a lot of responsibility, but it's also very fulfilling.
Right. What's the biggest obstacle that you've had to overcome?
That's a really good question. I think one of the biggest obstacles I've had to overcome is aspects of like mental illness and depression, because I was diagnosed with depression as a teenager. It led into a lot of difficult times for me. So I'd had problems with body image and suffered from anorexia and bulimia, only because I felt with eating that was the one thing that I had control over. I couldn't control the bullies. I couldn't control the animosity that I was feeling, or the support that I wasn't getting from other teachers. But I knew that I controlled my food, my intake, and that caused some damage with myself. And I started having chest pains, and realized that I had to get some help. And a lot of it stemmed from depression. And even today, like there's still like a lot of social anxiety that I get. So I go to a lot of schools and I talk to students and I talk to teachers about anti-bullying practices. But a lot of times it's hard for me to walk into schools because I see the long hallways, I see the narrow stairwells, I see the lockers, and I get flashbacks of when I was in high school. And sometimes it's hard because I don't have control over those spaces. And if I'm doing a talk in an audience, it's like I don't know what those kids are saying. I don't know what those people are saying. I'm just hoping that somebody is listening, and hopefully someone's there who can be an ally for me when I need it.
Do you think that educating youth about the LGBT and Aboriginal community and rights are important?
I think it's very important, because when you talk about that, you're talking about inclusivity. You're talking about acknowledging and respecting and celebrating identities. And you can have your beliefs and you can have your bias, but it doesn't change the fact that there's always going to be Aboriginal people here, or the First Nation people, or there's always going to be LGBTQ people here. Whether you like it or not, we have to share this world and we have to find that common ground and balance. It doesn't always mean we have to share space all the time. It's just a matter that if we are within those public settings, so whether it's customer service, whether it's in the subway, that you want to be treated the same way that you would like to be treated. So you treat other human beings as human beings. It doesn't matter their skin color. It doesn't matter their culture or their spiritual or religious beliefs. It doesn't matter who they love, especially when it doesn't matter because of who they love. Because it's none of your business. It's nobody else's business than theirs, right? So I think once people just can get over their own bias and get over their own discrepancies when it comes to hatred. And like I always hate those conversations when people say like, I'm not homophobic, but I'm not racist, but as soon as I hear that but, I'm like, no but, you're not racist, period. Let's move on, next topic. Because whatever you're going to say in your mouth, as somebody who has like studied social justice and studied social work and understands like that we're all human beings, that I don't want to hear what you have to say. And it comes with like a lot of friends, and like I do that all the time, because not a lot of my friends aren't social justice workers. They're not all advocates. So sometimes they can say problematic language, and then it's like, let's have a learning moment there. Yeah. So I think it's definitely important to talk about First Nations and Aboriginal issues, and making that awareness and education right from the get-go is like for its kids, like getting talking about Indigenous topics like in kindergarten and in grade 1 and all the way up into high school, and like making it as something mandatory, because like I've always had to learn somebody else's history and always ask questions about my own people's histories, and always being told that I had to wait, or that I had to wait to college, or I had to wait to high school, or wait to college, or wait to university to learn about my culture and my history. And I thought that was bull. Right. And I didn't. And I was like, well, why is that? When there's another history here, when there's another group of people who've always been here before other people got here, and we're not learning anything about them. And I think once you have that education, once you build that awareness, people become aware and they become less crappy towards other people, because now they would have a better understanding. And not just from like a academic standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint, and hearing what people's personal stories are, so you can put a face towards the cause. And a lot of times people are like, oh, I heard about Aboriginal people. I was like, oh, I heard about this. Oh, I took this course. Oh, I watched this one movie. And then like, oh, I heard your story. Never thought of it that way. So once you have those, when you build that space to build that capacity for awareness and education, you can start changing people's minds and how they think, and starting making them challenge their own belief systems. And that's where the real change happens.
Thank you so much for joining us. Pleasure to interview you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This show is produced by the YRU creative team, Annika, Peyton, Siobhan, Cody, Lalo, Jasmine, and Dante. Thanks to the Office of the Provincial Advocate for Children and Youth, and special thanks to Erwin Ellman, Audrey Thompson, Sandy Wynea Katz, Rhonda Andal, and the staff at CJRU.
Greetings, hello, Ani. I'm Teddy, and you are listening to YRU on CJRU.